This is former World Wrestling Federation superstar Duke the Dumpster Droese, and you need to subscribe to DNC Digital.
What's going on, everybody? This is your boy D from DNC Digital, back with another episode of DNC Radio. I hope everybody's doing good. There's a second wave going on of coronavirus, and I'm hoping that everybody stays safe. Stay home, keep your kids and your parents safe. That's all that matters, because right now there's some crazy shit going on, so we just want to make sure everybody's doing okay. So my guest today is Duke the Dumpster Droese. Duke the Dumpster Droese is a professional wrestler that wrestled with the WWE, then WWF, back in the mid-90s. He also was an independent wrestler throughout Florida, and we're going to talk about some stuff and some troubles that he's gone through that he's very open about, but he wants to use that experience to make sure he can help other people in the same road. Duke, how you doing, sir? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing all right, my friend. I'm glad we finally got to meet, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
No, thank you, man. I appreciate your time. It's so cool because as a kid, I'm not going to lie to you, but I do remember your vignettes before you debuted on the WWF. You had the old Michael Jordan commercial style thing when you said, I'm going to throw this trash bag and it's going to hit the wall and off the, basketball court and into the dumpster. I remember those things. Do you remember doing those vignettes and how you felt getting a vignette in itself seems like it's going to be a big deal when you debut?
Yeah, and it was pretty crazy to add to that. Even when I got there, it was actually Shane McMahon who was producing all my vignettes because he was working in the studio at the time. I think he was going around to all the different parts of the company one by one and learning everything more in depth. And so he was producing the vignettes. He came up with the Michael Jordan, Larry Bird deal. He also we came up with a lot of things together. We sat down and came up with a lot of ideas before we went out on the road. But he produced all those. So, and it's just funny because, before that point, I didn't even know who he was when I was at the tryout. And he came up and he was like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" He asked me about my tape, but he didn't introduce himself. So I didn't know who he was. So then they hire me and they fly me up there to do vignettes. And I meet him and I go, "Oh, okay, it's this office guy again," or whatever. And it turns out it's Shane McMahon because he starts talking. It's funny. He would always talk about his dad. He never called him Dad. He would say Vince. So I said, okay, this is an office guy. And no, it was freaking Shane McMahon. And it took me probably about an hour or so to realize, oh, shit, this is Shane McMahon. So, yeah, that's how that went down.
Not bad. You had a pretty interesting career, even though it wasn't as long as other people, but you have a lot of cool stories, and I want to get into them. But in the beginning, though, you said in an interview in the past, you were watching WrestleMania 1 with your father, and you stood up and you turned around and you just said, "That's what I'm going to do." So, when the kid has a dream, sometimes they get out of it. I wanted to be an author when I was a kid, and then, kids have dreams, but then they end up getting regular 9-to-5 jobs. What do you think you can credit to your persistence in becoming a professional wrestler?
Man, I really fell in love with it. And my family, especially again, my dad really supported everything I did. Now, my mom, was kind of the smart one. She said, my mom was working for the University of Miami at the time. So if we could get in on our grades, we had free tuition. So she said, go to college, get a degree. You can do wrestling while you're doing that. And then after, pursue it just so you have something to fall back on. And that was a great piece of advice. And that's what I did. But all along I knew I was going to wrestle. I mean, I just went to college and took stuff that interested me. I studied criminal justice. I minored in philosophy just because that stuff was interesting, because all along the plan was, when I get out of here, I'm going to go become a professional wrestler. And that's what I did.
So do you think, studying philosophy in college maybe helped you with some of the meetings that you would have business-wise when it came to the wrestling business?
Well, not with Vince McMahon. No matter how slick you think you are, he is the slickest promoter that ever lived.
Greatest worker in the world, right?
Oh, my God. That ain't no lie either. I thought I was intelligent, and that's just the thing. Vince realized that I was intelligent, but he also realized I thought I was intelligent, and he played that card to a T. He always pushed how smart I was and intelligent. I'm telling you, man, he could smooth talk the best of them. But
I've never heard it put that way. Like, I know this guy's smart, but he also thinks he's smart. Jeez.
yeah, and you would hear at times, like you could tell he'd do little things. He would be doing commentary with like a Jerry the King Lawler or something, and they're talking, and I'm in a match in the ring, and it's going da 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 da, and Jerry Lawler would say something like, "Oh, that big stupid garbage man," and Vince would say, "I think he's probably more intelligent than you think." And he would just throw in these little things that was like, he was pumping my head up full of stuff, and anytime we had any kind of dealings, he always had the upper hand. So yeah, it was tough to learn, and a lot of those guys worked in Memphis and all these other territories to learn that part of the business. I came out of Florida kind of clueless in that respect. So it was difficult. It was definitely difficult. And he was the toughest one of all the promoters, I think. He was.
When you talk about your mother making sure that you had a backup plan, you got your degree, what was her response when you decided that you were going to do wrestling full time?
She supported it as well. She was happy that I got a degree in case something ever happened. And later on, it was funny because when things started kind of falling apart and I became kind of disillusioned, which I'm sure we can talk about, but at one point, it was one of those deals where Vince McMahon made some promises, and then he just literally did the complete opposite. And when I talked to her about it, I just never forget. Her words exactly was, "Don't ever trust these people again." In that respect, she was kind of heartbroken for me, but she knew all along that I had a college degree and I could do something once I got out of there if that was the case.
So when you were working on the Florida circuit, you went as trash man. And as much digging as I do for research, and I love to do research, and I love to get these obscure facts, what made you be the trash man? What was that? Where did that character come from?
The original name was Rocco Gibraltar, and I was going to college at the University of Miami, getting that backup plan, of course. But I was in a fraternity, and a lot of my fraternity brothers came up with a lot of goofy names for wrestling because I was already wrestling on the independent circuit on the side, while I was going to school. Anyway, one name they came up with was Rocco Gibraltar. And it was such a cool name that I held on to it. I knew I was going to use it. But during the kind of creative process, at one point I was thinking, okay, I can use Rocco Gibraltar, but there's got to be a hook. It's got to be a character. And it's got to be a character that Vince McMahon would kind of jump on and so I started trying to think in terms of the alliteration. The G-Man, Rocco Gibraltar, is what I came up with. And G-Man, I had one of two choices. I said, okay, a G-Man could be like old school federal agent, or a G-Man could be actually a garbage man. That's how I came out with that. I went, that sounds pretty good. A blue-collar, babyface garbage man gimmick. So I became the garbage man, Rocco Gibraltar, down in Florida. And that's how that started.
Anybody that you emulated? Because the way you said blue collar, it made me think of Dusty Rhodes and the American Dream. And anybody you emulated while you were doing that, or anybody that you felt I can take a little piece of that character and put it into Duke the Dumpster Droese, or the Trash Man rather?
Well, I didn't do it necessarily in terms of the garbage man gimmick. I'll tell you who my influences were when I was coming up through the business, and it was 80s Ric Flair and the Road Warriors. And those were the guys. I tried to pattern my brawling style after the Road Warriors. And then I threw in I had to prove to everybody that I could wrestle too. So I threw in some Ric Flair here and there and did different things and stole some of his spots as a big 6'6", 300+ pound guy. But those were my influences. When I got to the World Wrestling Federation, Vince kind of tried to turn me in. His words were like a hillbilly Jim and a kind of a hacksaw Jim Duggan combined. And that's kind of what it became. And I was still, of course, using all that stuff that I stole from the Road Warriors and Ric Flair. But yeah, that's the kind of character it became.
Yeah, when you mentioned the Road Warriors, as a kid, I was always like, I always gravitated toward the shoulder pads and the cool face paint. But, when you grow up and you really see their work, you're like, oh my God, they're killing these guys. And one of my favorite stories of the Road Warriors was that the guys would go in the back and they would see the card. And at some points, some wrestlers would literally cry knowing that they're going to work with the Road Warriors. And then I don't know if you can confirm this or not. If they liked you, Animal took the bump for you or took the bump with you during the Doomsday Device. And if they didn't like you, he just let your legs go off from his shoulders.
I didn't know that. I've never heard that, but I think that's how Mark Canterbury, Henry Godwin broke his neck with that move, I believe. And I don't think Animal fell back with him. And I don't think they didn't like Mark. Everybody liked the Hog Farmer. So, but no, I never heard that. And I wasn't there then. I wish I was, because I wish I would have had a chance. I mean, I see Joe all the time now on the convention circuit, and I've met even Paul Ellering, which was the coolest thing in the world. But I wish I had the opportunity in the past to meet Hawk, to meet Mike, because that would have been freaking awesome. But no, I wasn't there then, unfortunately, and I never heard the rumors about whether Animal took a bump with you or not. I've never heard that.
It makes sense, though, because there's no protecting you when you let the legs go from your shoulders. Jesus. When you talk about opportunities, you had a hell of an opportunity, and some would say you had the balls to do it. When you said that you walked up to Vince at a convention with TV executives and you just handed him, your resume in the past, it's a tape of you. And so what do you feel like this is my only shot? I'm going to go do this. Or did you feel what drove you to do that? Because I saw in an interview that you gave one to George Animal Steel, who was a road agent at the time, hoping that it can get its way to Vince McMahon. But then you saw Vince and you said, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And you handed him the tape. And then thankfully it turned out to be a good opportunity for you. But that being said, what drove you to go up to Vince himself? A lot of people are intimidated by his presence, but
Well, yeah, like you said, I went to George Animal Steel before that. The whole plan was I had a bunch of these promo packs, and they were actually a tape and an actual paper resume and some photo, of course, 8x10 promo pictures. And I was going to drive all over the country and try to get jobs in different territories. But at one point early on, they were doing a show locally in Florida, in Miami, and George Animal Steel was the agent. And I actually had promised to help Danny Davis set up and tear down the ring so I could get in there, which I ended up just walking in anyway, but I still helped him with the ring. I didn't even need him to get me in because the people there thought I was a wrestler. But I walked in and I did hand it to George Steele, and he said he would make sure it got in the right hands. Well, then, I mean, literally probably a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, as I was getting ready to get in the car and start driving, I read in the newspaper they were talking about the steroid scandal and Hulk Hogan, who was at a local TV executives convention with WCW, which he had just hired him. And they were talking about the scandal, and Vince was on trial and all this stuff. And like the last sentence in the article was Vince McMahon, who was also at the convention, had no comment. And I realized, holy shit, this motherfucker's in Miami. And I didn't give myself time to think about it. Literally the next morning. By the next morning, I had already gotten in touch with a friend locally that was a TV executive, and I got his credentials for Channel 2 Miami. And I walked in there like I was an executive, and I swear, in a suit, and I swear to you, I walked right up. Vince happened to be all by himself off to the side drinking coffee, and I just made a beeline right for him, walked right up, introduced myself. Stan Lane always made fun of me. He was there. Stan Lane always said, "You were talking real fast. Hey, Mr. McMahon, my name's Mike Droese." And I said, man, I didn't talk like that, but I probably did because I was scared shitless. And he asked me a few questions, and, that was it. And I got the hell out of there. And by the time I got to the parking lot, I couldn't believe I had done that shit. But I did not give myself time to think about it. That was the key, because I would have talked myself out of it. I swear, I just walked in there and did it. And that proved to be the difference. And J.J. Dillon, Vince had J.J. call me and bring me in for a tryout. And it was funny when I got there for the tryout. Who comes walking up? George the Animal Steel. I told him all about you, brother. I'm like, yeah, sure you did. I said that fucking tape is probably still in the garbage can at the James L. Knight Center in Miami, Florida. But it was just funny how it came together, man. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't give myself a chance to think twice. I just went and did it.
That says a lot. What do you think when you hear stories about people being too intimidated to go up to Vince to give him an idea or to bring up an issue in their career? I know you, despite everything that's gone on, you said that you had a fairly good relationship with Vince McMahon and that he was always very welcoming when you wanted to bring up an issue. But nowadays, it seems like there's such an infrastructure that there's so many people to get through just to get to him. So what does it say with your experience of people that just don't feel like they can go up to him or they're too intimidated by him?
Well, like you said, I do think it's true. Things have changed a lot in the infrastructure. I don't think anybody walked up to him and got a job after me. There was one person before me, and that was Oscar, the rapper from Men on a Mission. He walked up to Vince and rapped to him in a elevator. And then there was me, and then that was it. I think they started keeping him protected from people just walking up to him because they didn't want that to happen. Because it happened to me that way, I felt like I had kind of carte blanche to walk right up to Vince and talk to him whenever I wanted to. And in some respects, that was good. But later on, it turned out to be bad because I was walking up and bugging the shit out of him all the time, and it didn't work out well. But yeah, they've even changed that, man. You can't just walk up to Vince. You got to kind of go. I believe you got to go through you got to jump through a bunch of hoops if you want to talk to him. And usually, I don't even think people get to talk to him so much anymore, unless you're one of those considered top guys. Those are the guys that get to have meetings with Vince himself. Everybody else has to meet with probably writers or underneath agents. So, yeah, it's changed. It's changed a lot. It was probably the kiss of death for me walking up to him. I thought I had a special relationship with him, but later on I realized no,
we'll
it's
talk
another
about
one.
it later. That you definitely called him during breakfast a few times, and like
I did
hey,
that
Vince,
once, but yes, I did. I sure shit did. At Bret Hart's advice, what a freaking moron I was.
Yeah,
But
that's something that's something I definitely wanted to talk about. You riding with Bret Hart. We'll talk about that in a second. You actually you were able to debut with the WWF thanks to George Animal Steel, right? But you you went up against Barry Horowitz, who's like a favorite. He's like a cult favorite of people who grew up watching during that era, and he's just a funny ass character. Always patted himself on the back. But he was like the jobber of all jobbers. Can you tell me a little bit about Barry Horowitz and anything he told you before your first match with the WWF?
well, here's the thing. That's actually incorrect. He was not my first match. That is, I don't know if that's on Wikipedia or where that is, but my very first match was with a guy named Mike Bell on Superstars, and it was the actual match where I walked out and I was wheeling a little dumpster with me, and Jerry the King Lawler was on the side and he wanted to interview me. And I walked up, as I was walking out the curtains, I walked up to Jerry Lawler so he could interview me, and he put a clothespin on his nose and started laughing at me. And I dumped a can of garbage over his head. And that was what started everything off. And we ended up doing the live Raw deal where he hit me with the can and all that stuff happened. But that was actually my first match. I didn't wrestle Barry till later. I think my first Raw match was against Barry Horowitz. Barry Horowitz, to me, was never a jobber. I came up again. I was coming up watching championship wrestling from Florida, and I remember Barry there, man. And he had a run. He had this run of 0 and like 100 and something. He lost so many matches, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he won a match. He was a great, great heel. It didn't matter that he was losing matches, and he won a match, and he ended up winning the Florida heavyweight championship or something down there. And it was amazing. And he was wrestling, I think he was Jack Hart for a while. And then, later on he became Barry Hart and then Barry Horowitz maybe. But me and Barry are friends to this day. We talk quite a bit on social media, and we see each other at the conventions and stuff like that. But Barry was always an interesting guy. And when you wrestled him, you had to be very careful because he was there supposed to be putting you over. And if you let him get away with it, he would take all kinds of shit and make you look silly. in a WWF ring. So, yeah, Barry was like that. Brooklyn Brawler was like that, and Iron Mike Sharp was like that. Those guys, if you let them, man, they would take all kinds of stuff and make you look silly if you let them. But you just couldn't do that. But Barry's always a great guy, and I still love talking to him to this day. We interact on social media all the time. I love watching his YouTube stuff now. He's got a YouTube channel.
When you talk about Barry Horowitz, even yourself, there's a lot of characters during that era. It's the occupational character stuff. It's like T.L. Hopper and I think it was Brooklyn Brawler who did Knuckleball Schwartz, I think. And there was so many like these
Isaac Yankem, TDS.
Isaac Yankem, yes. And like the most famous of all. When you look back at these, you look back with a smile. But I remember as a fan, you're watching, you're just like, oh, what is this? Why do you think fans like myself look back at these characters and this era, this small little era, with such nostalgia and like, oh yeah, if they came out and they did a spot, if I saw Duke the Dumpster Droese come out and hit somebody with a trash can lid, the whole place would pop. Why do you think we look back with such nostalgia at these characters?
I think that's something that's really just kind of recently started really taking off, the looking back in a nostalgic way. It's funny. I with all the things that I went through for a long time, I disappeared and I really didn't pay attention to what was going on. From time to time, I would see things that were posted in the early 2000s and people would talk about all these old gimmicks and how stupid they were and crappy gimmicks and all this stuff. And I was just like, well, who cares? I don't care what people think. And it was okay. And then just recently, in about 2018, when I kind of came back and started talking to fans, I realized things had changed the way people were looking back, and they started calling it the golden era, the late 80s, early 90s, that new generation era. People look back fondly now at those years. And yes, of course, there were a lot of occupational gimmicks. And I think that was Vince's thing. He wanted people that were relatable to the fans and, the blue collar worker kind of gimmick, of course. But generally speaking, he wanted people that were relatable, that fans could relate to. But yeah, this thing lately with people looking back and, I'm interacting a lot more with fans and it's really been fun. I'm really enjoying it. Talking about the old times, even though, like you said before, I wasn't there a tremendously long time. It was still crazy. It was fun. It was exciting. It was an exciting time. Even though it was a difficult time during those years, it was still fun and it was an experience. I got to travel the world and make a lot of friends, a lot of whom I still carry to this day that I'm friends with. So it was definitely interesting, and it's great that people are looking back on it fondly now.
When you talk about your feud with Jerry Lawler, that TV spot was actually looked back on as the first hardcore TV spot. And to the point that Jerry Lawler had to apologize on camera. How did that idea come about? Was it something too touchy that you guys were kind of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do it? Talk about, planning that spot.
Well, what the office wanted us to do was just do the King's Court. He wouldn't let me in the ring. He wouldn't really let me talk very much. Finally, I got sick of him and I said, to hell with you, I'm leaving. He was just supposed to jump me, beat me down. And that would start the angle. After I dumped the garbage on him before, then he jumps me and we got a hot angle. Well, Lawler, when we were planning it in the back, we sat down to talk about what we were going to do. And he was the one that suggested, he goes, what would you think about if we spiced it up a little bit and I hit you with your own garbage can? And I was like, yeah, man, I'm down with that. I mean, I'm cool. He goes, let me see if we can talk to somebody and see if they'll say it's okay. So what we actually did is, and I think Jerry Lawler knew exactly what he was doing. Jack Lanza was the agent. I believe he was in charge of that spot. And we walked up to Jack together, and Jerry and I kind of pitched the idea, you think it'd be okay if Lawler hit me with my own garbage can? And I just remember Jack Lanza looked at us, and he said, it's live TV. Screw it. Just do it. you can ask for forgiveness later, but it's live TV. So I was like, oh, okay. And we went and did it. And of course, Jerry hit me with the garbage can. And if you watch on the live segment, they immediately pull the camera back to a wide angle where you can't see what's really going on there. It was right there in the aisle outside the curtain where he attacked me. And they pulled away to a far camera. Well, when we got in the back after that, everybody was freaking out. And I just remember Shane McMahon ran up to me and he goes, "What the hell happened?" And I was like, "What do you mean, what the hell happened?" I thought it would be okay if we did that. And they freaked out, man. And so at that point, that Gorilla Monsoon and the Macho Man Randy Savage were doing the commentary for Monday Night Raw that night on Live Raw. They put them back on the screen after the break, and they had them apologize to the World Wrestling Federation fans for seeing something so violent. They kept apologizing, and they said, "You would never see that on WWF TV again. We apologize." And I just remember seeing that afterwards going, oh, man. They just took something that could have been a really hot angle, and they just kind of dumped some bucket of ice water on it. And then to add insult to injury, on the show, they used to have a show called Superstars. Jerry Lawler had to go back to the office that weekend and pre-tape an apology. And it was kind of like comedy. And it was funny because if you really watch it and you listen, Jerry Lawler, he's apologizing, and it's kind of a goofy thing. He doesn't really want to apologize or whatever. And there is a studio person. You can hear their voice saying, "Mr. Lawler, you're here to apologize. Please." That's Shane McMahon. If you listen to it, that's his voice. And but I just remember watching that, and I'm going, oh, this makes it even worse. He has to apologize for hitting me. He shouldn't have to apologize. He should be coming on TV going, "That's right. I smashed the dumpster over the head with his own can and blah, blah, blah," and heated it up, but they didn't do that.
It takes so much heat away because him being the heel, like heels need to be justified in everything they do. It kind of goes against everything that you guys work toward.
But at that time, they wanted it to be family entertainment. It was geared towards the little kids. They were selling all that, merchandise to kids, and that's just kind of how it was. It was supposed to be family entertainment. It was the original PG era. And they just deemed it too violent. So they handled it the way they handled it. And I just think it was dead in the water at that point. We didn't even have a pay-per-view match out of it. Me and Jerry Lawler, we had a singles match on Raw later on down the road where Doink and Dink the Clown got involved. And I got to beat Jerry Lawler by count out, of course, because I never pinned anybody. But they went with the angle with the King versus Doink, and then they had all the little Dinks and all the little Kings, and they did the Survivor Series.
Do you think now, maybe in retrospect, you could have saved the trash can shot for the payoff? That way, you guys would have ran through the whole entire storyline, asked for forgiveness, but at least we got the payoff match.
Knowing what I know now, I would have started politicking immediately. We would have still done the garbage can shot live on Raw, and I would have said to Shane McMahon at that moment where he said, "What the hell happened?" I would have said, "What do you mean, what the hell? That is a fire hot angle. Don't screw it up. We got heat now. Let's walk this thing through. Let's run this angle. We got a lot of heat. This is at least a semi-main event, angle for WrestleMania. Let's go. Let's do this. Let's make money. People are shocked. Shocked equals money. They will buy tickets." But now, then I was brand new, man. I was just happy to be there, and I was scared to piss anybody off. So I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Oh, I'll do whatever you tell me to."
You almost sounded like Bruce Pritchard trying to sell that match, man.
Yeah, right? I would have too, boy. I would have put on the Bruce Pritchard shoes, and I would have been selling like a son of a bitch. But that's knowing now what I know now. Back then, I was trying to be humble, and I was trying not to step on anybody's toes or piss anybody off. And it was a mistake, and we ended up with just a Raw match out of it for the blow-off.
When you talk about stepping on people's toes, I know a group of wrestlers in the mid-90s called the Click, stepped on a lot of people's toes, and we're going to get to that in a second. But first, I want to shout out my buddies at Can You Handlebar. Can You Handlebar is a cool facial hair product company that they have a beard balm, they have beard oil, they have mustache wax, they have brushes and little mustache combs. And they're a cool company. They've been partnering with me for a few months. And so if you guys have any facial hair, I know with the quarantine, you guys haven't been shaving. So if you have a mustache and a beard, you want to keep it looking good, make sure you look up canyouhandlebar.com. Use my promo code DNC Digital. You get 15% off. So, well, do I call you Mike or do I call you Duke or Dumpster? What do I call you? I know some people get some shoot names or some people do character names.
It doesn't matter to me, man. I go by Mike or Duke, man. It's, you know.
So you started a rivalry with Triple H, and you were mentioning that at the time he was already in the Click, and you've had some run-ins with the Click. But do you think at that point it was early in his career too? But did you remember working with him, thinking, man, this guy's gonna do something in this business?
I knew he was good. I knew he he was passionate about the wrestling business. And he was certainly willing to do whatever I wanted him to do. I threw him all over the place, and he willingly took all those bumps for me. But you knew he was good. Honestly, my finish move in and of itself was difficult for a lot of guys to get up for. And at a certain time, I couldn't put some people in my finish move because they couldn't get up for it. Some of the enhancement wrestlers couldn't get up for it. So I had to have a secondary move, which was a corkscrew elbow. Anyway, Triple H went up for that trash compactor like nothing. I mean, he was good. He knew how to work in that ring and how to move. And he had a great mind for the business. You knew he was serious. He wasn't one of these guys that was doing drugs and drinking at all. He never did. And I believe it's still that way to this day. So in that respect, you knew he loved the business. But no, I never knew he'd be like second in command or possibly taking over the company. And I didn't know that.
But he was rolling with the Click, and a lot of people have their feelings about the Click. One question I do want to ask is that, yeah, they looked out for themselves and they made sure that they were always in the main event. But for all the people that had problems with them, don't you think you would probably do the same thing if you were in the same position or friends with them?
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't kind of realize all that till later on, after I was gone for a long time, because there was a period where I thought maybe I was pissed off at them some, like they had something to do with my failure in the wrestling business. But they really, I mean, I've heard stories of where they talked about starving guys, and it seemed like somebody was starving me at the end because I wasn't booked on house shows for a long time, and I wasn't on TV, and I wasn't making money. But I've said this in many interviews here recently, and it's true. If you wanted to get over, there's ways you can get over. Get yourself over and work hard and not be out partying all night long like I was, drinking and doing drugs and doing stupid shit that were counterproductive to being successful in the wrestling business. And I was doing a lot of things that weren't working in this business the right way. So in that respect, I never had a major heat or a major problem with the Click. In fact, I got along with those guys. And I still get along with them now when I see them at conventions and stuff. But, we all have our Shawn Michaels stories. We all have our Razor Ramon stories or stuff like that, but there was never an instance where, we butted heads or I had a major problem with anybody in the Click. But yeah, again, looking back, knowing what I know now, there's shit that I would have done to get myself over, regardless of what the Click thought. It wouldn't have mattered. Eventually, as Vince always says, the cream rises to the top, and I would have put myself in a better position. I've often said I was so humble and trying not to step on toes. I was so worried about offending people. Bruce Pritchard even said recently, I was too nice for the wrestling business. There's probably truth to that. I didn't have that killer instinct as far as business goes at that time. So, I can't blame the Click for anything that happened to me. That was all my fault and all my doing.
Well, I mean, that's very admirable to say as a grown man. There's a lot of people that they have their shoot interviews and they talk about the Click. There's one interesting story that you do have with both Shawn Michaels and X-Pac, because a lot of people have said in the past, oh man, if we crossed the Click or if we went into business for ourselves or if I accidentally punched them, oh man, my career would have been over. Can you talk about that night that you bloodied up X-Pac and the interesting result that came from that?
Well, here's the thing about that story, and X-Pac and I we've talked about this not too long ago, ever since the interview, and he confirmed the story for the most part. But let me clarify some things. Yes, we were in a 6-man tag. It was me and the Bushwhackers versus Isaac Yankem, X-Pac. He was 1-2-3 Kid at the time. Isaac Yankem, 1-2-3 Kid, and Al Snow was wrestling as Leif Cassidy, part of the New Rockers. And those three, it was a strange 6-man tag. And we were doing shows.
That's a hell of a match. Now that you're naming everybody, man, I would have loved to see that match. I got to look that up.
I'm running around, pumping my arms up and down, going, whoa, yay, just like the damn Bushwhackers. But it was a strange combination, but we made it work, and it was fun. But I will say this. I was on a lot of pills at the time, and X-Pac has admitted he was too. And I think both of us were a little loosey-goosey in that ring. He was throwing some kicks, and I ended up mafia kicking him in the face, and he got bloodied up. And the end result in the locker room, he came back. I remember I was sitting there, and I was sitting right across from Shawn Michaels in the locker room, and X-Pac 1-2-3 Kid came in, and his mouth was full of blood, and I think he made sure it was really full of blood when he came back, just for the sake of the show. But we went like this and looked at Shawn Michaels, and Shawn actually said something to the effect of, well, you shouldn't have been kicking him so hard. Now, I think both of us, like I said, we were both a little loosey-goosey, and we were throwing stuff. In fact, I was chopping frickin' Glenn Jacobs, Isaac Yankem, who would later become Kane. I was chopping him so hard, and at one point we were in the corner, and Glenn, Isaac Yankem, Kane, looked me square in the eyes, and he goes, Duke, that's enough. He was like, it was like a father scolding his child. And I just put my hands on his chest and put my head down and started laughing. But I was afraid he was going to hit me. But I stopped chopping him. But, yeah, I kicked the kid. Anyway, what happened? At some point, the kid crapped his pants. And I don't know if it was actually in that match. It was in one of those 6-man tags with all those same people. And I remember him putting the tights that were full of crap in a little garbage can. And maybe that was just temporary till he could wash them out, because he said he didn't throw them away. My original story, I said he threw them in the garbage, but he said they were too expensive to throw away. And there's probably truth to that, obviously. But, me kicking him in the face, I don't necessarily think that made him crap his pants. And maybe he didn't even crap his pants in that actual match that night where I kicked him. That's possible too. But I remember it all together in this haze of crazy drug use that I was in those days, and it made for a good story. But all of the details were true. But I don't know if I necessarily kicking him in the face, I made him crap his pants. That is not necessarily the truth. So, but yeah, that was an interesting 6-man tag. And, yeah, I even pissed off Kane to the point where I thought he was going to kill me. He scolded me like a little child. Duke, stop chopping me. So, yeah, it was a little crazy. And it was interesting that, Shawn Michaels actually kind of took my side in the argument. Like, you shouldn't have been kicking him so damn hard, because Kid was kicking me. He was throwing them karate kicks that night. And, I don't know necessarily that it was a receipt when I kicked him, but I was just kind of amped up, and I went, oh, okay, boom. And I kicked him just like I was chopping, Kane real hard. I kicked Kid real hard. So, there was a lot of potatoes getting thrown around that night. Let's just say that.
Definitely. You were really, what would the word be? Fortunate. That's a good word. You were really fortunate to ride with one of the best that ever did it. People have their feelings about him, but I adore this guy. He was my favorite growing up. And I'd love to hear a couple of stories of when you rode with Bret Hart. The only thing is that you were thinking in the beginning, as that humble, happy kid from Florida, I'm getting to ride with the champion. But then you said that in the end, you were kind of disillusioned, or you thought there was maybe a different motivation to him letting you ride with him.
Well, what actually happened was I was really getting frustrated with being in the World Wrestling Federation and the way they were not using me very well, and I wasn't making a lot of money, and I was just really, really getting pissed off. And at one point, I was just kind of exhausted with all of it. And I remember walking up to Brett in a bar. All the boys were hanging out at a particular bar somewhere, and I just walked up and I said, man, I'm sick of this shit. I'm just tired of the way I'm being used. And I think at that point, I was tired of the clique, even though they really had nothing to do with my demise. I was just projecting it on them because I had to be pissed off at somebody other than myself, because surely none of it was my fault. But I just expressed it that way to Brett, and he goes, well, why don't you come ride with me? And I just remember thinking, holy shit, I get to ride with the champ. And it was funny because people kind of looked at me funny. They were like, nobody rides with Brett, because that was true. If you really watched Brett, they called him the Lone Wolf, and that was for a good reason. He was always by himself, and he was always freaking late too. I'll tell you that. But I was kind of protected. I was late with him, but I would show up late to the building, and I wouldn't get in trouble because I was with the champ, Bret Hart. But he would give me a lot of different advice, and we would talk wrestling, and he would share his experience with me. And I just think some of the time, being in the position I was, just starting out, Duke the Dumpster in my first couple years, the garbage man wrestler, and this champion, Bret the Hitman Hart, that at that point, I think had been with the company like 14 years, maybe. He was giving me champion advice for a guy just starting out. And I also think, to a certain extent, he was winding me up and having some fun, which I had seen him. I've seen Davey Boy do that. Owen Hart did it a little bit, but he wouldn't wind up a guy and cost him his career, but Owen would rib guys. But I'd seen all those guys winding people up after that point and realized kind of what was going on. And later on, after I'd left the business, I kind of realized what Brett was doing. You had alluded to him he gave me Vince's hotel room at a pay-per-view and said, you need to call him. It was first thing in the morning. He goes, you need to call Vince and tell him, it was right before the pay-per-view with Triple H, and tell him I wasn't happy with the finish. Man, that was stupid advice. And I took it. He was freaking winding me up. And I called Vince, and he's sitting there eating his breakfast. And he says, well, hey, pal, I'm eating breakfast, but I'll call you back. And he called me back. And that's where I got the famous speech from Vince. It's not like we're pushing Duke the Dumpster to be champion in 6 months. Just show up like you always do with a smile on your face and do your job. And then that's what I did. And then later on a Raw match, I really smiled. It's that infamous picture where I pressed Triple H over my head and shot this shit-eating grin at the hard camera because I was pissed. But that was that conversation, and that was all from advice that Bret Hart gave me. And another occasion, he freaking gave me Vince McMahon's home telephone number and said, you need to call Vince and talk to him about turning you heel and all this stuff. Well, I called, and Vince talked to me a couple times, but I think I was wearing out my welcome.
It's interesting you say that he wanted you to just come in, clock in, smile, and take your check home. But as a fan, you always hear these stories that he doesn't like people to do that, or that he wants people to be more assertive and take initiative when it comes to their career. It seems like there's a thin line in the wrestling business that they want you to just come in and shut up and do what they tell you to do, or Vince does like somebody to challenge him.
I think any new character coming in, Vince wants you to assert yourself, and you have to. And that was one of those things I did not understand. I remember hearing a story from the Big Show talking about when he came in and Steve Austin getting on him for not being mean enough and assertive enough. And, the Big Show almost flopped in the WWF because he was too nice and he was giving people too much. Well, I was guilty of the same thing, man, and I didn't know any better. I came in, I was not assertive. So when you come in and you don't assert yourself, I think at a certain point, Vince McMahon becomes turned off to your character. And then you take a different position in his eyes as a character. And at the point he told me to just show up with a smile on my face and do my job, that's what I pretty much was. I was a job guy in his eyes, even though he was promising me this push and they were going to turn me heel, which never materialized. I think at that point, my purpose was to get Triple H over. And that's kind of how it worked out. And I realized a lot at that point. And again, I was pissing him off a lot too. And it just kind of ended badly. But that's kind of how it worked out, man. There was a lot of things I was clueless. And I can freely admit that. I don't think a lot of ex-wrestlers would talk about this stuff because they'd be embarrassed. But, man, I look back on it, and some of it's funny as shit. I can make fun of myself. Shit, I'm the butt of my own joke quite often. And a lot of the stuff I did was just damn ridiculous. And it's funny as hell, and I'm glad to talk about it. I don't care, I look back fondly on those years, even though maybe Brett was winding me up and I had the experiences I did, and maybe I was clueless. But, I can look back on it now and laugh. I mean, I'm in a good place now. I'm not worried about it.
One cool story that I read of you was, it had nothing to do with this person personally. It was just your frustration with your position in the company. But you're the one guy, well, not the one guy, but you're one of the few that said, I'm not doing the job for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Even though he was the ringmaster at the time, it's still Steve Austin. And you said, no, I'm not going to do the job. Thankfully, he was really receptive of it and he didn't take any offense. But this was during the time that you were already getting frustrated with the company, right?
Yeah, and they were kind of killing me. They weren't putting me on TV. I was not on house shows. I was not making money. And also, my first 2-year contract was about to be up. And right at that moment, he just happened to be coming in. And I believe I would have been his first TV match. And it was Brett. And that was the first time he told me not to do something. He said, I would refuse to do it. And I went, holy shit. Well, if the champ's saying it, I better do it. Well, the only reason it worked was because my contract was about up. And I went and talked to Bruce and I said, I was pissed off. I'm like, what the hell do I have to do to improve my position here? And he talked to Vince and all that stuff. But I just remember right after I went and told him I wasn't going to do the job for the ringmaster, later to become Stone Cold Steve Austin, the first person to walk up to me was Fatu, Rikishi, Junior Fatu. And he said, you need to go talk to Steve and tell him what's up. And that was a great piece of advice. And I walked up to Steve, and Steve was like, hey, I hear we're working together. I said, no, actually, we're probably not. And he goes, really? I said, listen, man, I got to tell you what's going on. These guys have been killing me here lately. And I just kind of walked in and told him I wasn't willing to do it. And it's nothing against you personally, is what I told him. And he completely understood, obviously, coming from his situation with WCW at that point. He completely understood. We became really good friends after that. We rode together quite a bit. So, it worked out okay. But, yeah, I refused to do a job for Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that's the way I tell the damn story now, too. And he laughs about it, too.
That's awesome. What some people might think when they hear professional wrestling or professional wrestler, the occupation of a professional wrestler, they think it's like some big lavish lifestyle and it's all, velvet ropes and red carpets and stuff. But it does take a lot of financial burden to keep up with the career. Now, you were talking about not doing house shows and going to TVs but not being booked. Can you talk about the financial difficulties of that? Like, you're not, because from what I understand, you get part of the gate, and if you don't do the match, you don't get money. So, but you're still paying for your travel and your hotel and your car. So was that a catalyst to your frustration after you stopped getting booked?
Yeah, money was already really bad. Money was so bad In fact, when you were in the WWF at that time, everybody, when they got to a building at a house show, could take a $200 cash draw to go towards paying any road expenses, right? There were shows that were so bad that some of us wrestlers knew if we didn't take that $200 draw, we wouldn't get $200 for the night. That's how bad it was. And I knew that Vince McMahon didn't have the balls to send me a negative invoice. If I took 200 and I only made 150, he wasn't going to send me an I owe you or I owe him $50 letter. So I took that $200 quite often because I knew I wouldn't make any more money. That's how bad it was. And there was the guys down mid card and lower like me. There were no guarantees. There were certain, guys like Bret Hart and those guys were getting $500,000 guarantees and stuff. But the rest of us were just schlepping along, man, trying to make a living. And they wouldn't let you just go work for somebody else, like on the independents and stuff. Man, you had to it took an act of Congress to try and go work for an independent. Even if you were just sitting at home, they would just let you sit at home. And, I just remember voicing my complaints about that. I'm like, I'm sitting home not making any money. And at one point, they started paying guys like me and there was only a few of us that were sitting home for long periods of time. They would send us money from house shows, like $100-something bucks. I just remember like Shawn Michaels complaining, "Where are these guys that are sitting home getting paid?" And I was like, "Fucking, you got a lot of nerve. You're probably making $1 million a year. I can't even make like $200 in a fucking month when I'm sitting home, and you're pissed off about it." So that's kind of how it went then, man. It was just really rough times financially. It was really rough.
That led to you deciding to like self-medicate, and like you've been very open about your alcohol and drug use. How deep down that hole did you get, and how did you get out of it?
Well, when you're wrestling that schedule like we were back then, it was, man, we were wrestling 250, sometimes 300 nights a year, and your body's taking a beating. And I tried to be one of those guys that didn't take anything for the pain, but at some point I just kind of fell into that group and I started taking stuff. I was like, because it made it easier. And I was always the first guy at the bar drinking alcohol and doing all that kind of stuff. And, it starts off just taking a few things to help yourself along. And then it becomes a situation where you got to take a handful of these pills to get out of bed in the morning. You got to take a handful of these pills to go to the gym. You got to take a handful of these pills to get in the ring at night. And then when you get to the hotel, you got to take a handful of these pills to go to sleep and then start the whole deal over the next day. And it becomes this vicious cycle. And it starts to take more and more and more pills just to do the job. And that's when it becomes addiction. And by the time I left the WWF, I had a full-blown drug addiction with pills. And it got really bad because I went home and I wasn't married. I didn't have kids and stuff. So I really had no accountability. A lot of these guys would go home from the road and they had wives and kids and had to be fathers and family men. And I went home and I continued to party. And when I ended up just completely leaving the WWF, I went down this downward spiral and really started using harder drugs and getting crazier. And it took me a while. I actually went to rehab twice. The first time, I was living down in Florida then. The first time, I moved up to Tennessee where my family had moved, and they put me in rehab in 2003. Then I became a school teacher for several years, and I was probably clean about 7 or 8 years. And then I had a foot injury, and I relapsed and started using pills again. And then it got really bad again. And I started injecting. I became an IV drug user. I would melt morphine pills in a spoon, just like a junkie. I basically was a junkie. And I was shooting up and trying to hold on for dear life to a teaching job during the day. And then, I was running around with all kinds of characters by night and doing things I shouldn't do. And I got set up selling a few pills to somebody because I was trying to get stronger pills that I could shoot up. And I got busted and lost the teaching job and all that stuff. And that was it. At that point, and I work with people now, like we've talked about, but I always tell folks it's got to get painful enough for you to finally stop. And that was the moment when they came to my house and arrested me, and I knew all that stuff I'd worked so hard for to get back, the teaching job, that career, and everything was all gone. that was it. And now I knew I had to go to rehab, which I did again. I went to rehab to get physically clean. But once I was physically clean, I was willing to do whatever it took. And that's what I continue to do to this day. But that's how it all kind of unfolded, man. It turned into a bad drug addiction. And every time I went back, it got a lot worse and was a lot faster. So, yeah,
When you talk about your foot injury, you were talking about kind of not listening to doctor's orders and continue to like take pills and stuff. And then it came to the point that you had to decide to amputate your foot. So why do you feel that you didn't listen to doctor's orders the first time?
Because I had already started using drugs again, and I was running around out there getting drugs and finding pills. So I was more worried about finding drugs than following doctor's orders. In fact, me being out there kind of running around in some strange way, maybe subconsciously, my foot was staying hurt longer and I could stay on drugs longer. And I still had that excuse to use more drugs. And it fell apart. It was full of metal and stuff. It fell apart. And then later on, they tried to fix it. Another doctor tried to fix it again. And I was still running around and I was shooting up then and I was doing drugs. But it didn't fall apart the second time, but it ended up getting a really bad staph infection deep inside the foot. And by the time I realized it, it felt like my foot was falling off from the inside and there wasn't much left that they could build on in there. And, I had to go to the hospital and lay there for like 2 weeks on IV antibiotics. And the option was, he said he could clean it up and fuse it all together and I wouldn't have any mobility. But the main thing was I would still be in pain. Or they could take the foot, fit me with a good prosthetic. And after things got settled with that prosthetic leg, I would be out of pain. The option of being out of pain at that point sounded really, really good because I had been in such horrible pain for those 2 years prior that I jumped on that and I took it. Now, it wasn't as easy as they said it was. Matter of fact, I'm having a difficult time right now because I had an infection in the leg and that stump, and I'm still healing from it. But it wasn't as easy as they said. But it is what it is, and I can't say I regret doing what I did and letting them amputate the leg. That's just part of it, I think. That's one of those, man, I've learned a lot of hard lessons through this deal. And that's one of them. I think I would probably be in a much worse situation if I had the foot still and it was fused. I would probably still be on pain meds to try and deal with just getting around day-to-day life. Now I live life. I don't take pain medicine. If I have pain, I deal with it. I'll take a couple aspirin and that's it. Because that's how I have to live now. But, I look back, I can't say I have any regrets about it. I had to do what I had to do and I had to learn some tough lessons and that's what happened.
Those lessons are now lessons that you get to teach other people. You say you work with people who suffer with drug addiction and are still in it or coming out of it and having the trouble transitioning into not using. Can you talk about how rewarding it is for you having your experience? And do you feel like they maybe listen to you more than they listen to somebody with a psychology degree?
Well, that's exactly what happens. The first thing coming in the door, I went through the drug court program that I now work for. And when I first walked through the door, the woman sitting at the desk that interviewed me was also a former participant in the drug court. So she had been through it. There's something to be said. We trust each other more. I do find that's the case. They do trust me because they know I've been there and a lot of them know how much I've lost. A lot of them are people that I taught and coached in school, that are coming through now. It also helps me stay clean. The fact that I'm helping other people and trying to help teach them and from my experiences, that helps me stay clean too. I see people coming through the door at different levels, just starting out and this trying to get clean for the first time, or somebody that's been doing it 2 years or different. And I just remember, I can look back and say, I remember when I was there and I don't want to go back there. So in that respect, it keeps me clean. So it's this give and take, we both benefit from it. And it's definitely my experience though, that helps them and it helps me as well.
Can you look back at any instant that maybe you've had some type of humbling conversation with somebody that you had an impact more than you thought you did?
Yeah, especially when they come back later after they've already finished, after they've gotten off of probation, maybe, and they don't have any sentence anymore, and nobody's looking over their shoulder, or nobody's drug tested them anymore, and they're still clean and doing the right thing, and they come back and they tell me it was because something they learned from me or something I said. That's always an amazing feeling. Because sometimes when you're in the trenches, man, and you're teaching them from day to day, sometimes you think a lot of it just goes in one ear and out the other, and maybe you're not reaching people because it's a tough line of work, man. Not a lot of people are successful. Not a lot of people stay clean very long. It's difficult. But when somebody comes back and they tell me, I remember when you said this in class, and that stuck with me, I'm like, all right. Those kind of things make it all worth it.
This may sound like a difficult question, but now that the WWE has implemented drug testing and they have their own wellness policy, it happened, unfortunately, after, the world lost Eddie Guerrero, and some people might feel like it's a thinly veiled thing to do. Obviously, they reached out to past wrestlers and they've offered help with rehab financially. Do you feel that's after losing too many people, or do you feel that that's because they're a publicly traded company with investors looking at them like, why are we losing these people to steroids and drugs and stuff?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think all of those things come into play, but I think it was the right move. But I also think that Vince McMahon and the WWF, WWE can't be held responsible for people's drug addictions. We're adults. I remember hearing Vince say in an interview one time, at some point, we have to grow up. And, Vince back in the 80s, he used to do drugs and have a good old time and do a lot more stuff. But he grew up. And a lot of people a lot of people in the business at that time grew up. Some people didn't. Some people continued going down that path and getting worse and worse. I was one of those people. But I can't blame them. Yes, it's a hard lifestyle and your body takes a beating. But you can't blame this business, or you can't blame a promoter or a company. Now, I absolutely love the fact that they came out when they did and they started offering free rehab to people. Now, funny thing is, I was too proud to take that. And luckily, I still had insurance the last time I went to rehab, but I was too proud to take it from the WWF. I didn't want to get in touch with them at all. I didn't want anybody to know what was going on. But I think it's a great thing that they did. They put some guys through rehab and been successful. They put some guys through rehab numerous times, unfortunately, but that's kind of part of the deal. Is it in part, maybe partially a PR move because they are a publicly traded company? Yeah, probably. That's part of it. But I think there's also people that work there in that company now that have talked to Vince, and he's probably been convinced that it's a good thing, and they needed to address it. They just couldn't leave it hanging out there because so many people were becoming addicted. And, they needed more education for people coming through the system and becoming wrestlers. On how not to go down that path. With Steve Austin is often called those days when I was there and right before and into the Attitude Era. He calls it the Wild West years. And that's true. Man, we were left to our own devices on a lot of those things. And some of us had to learn the hard way, and make a lot of mistakes. But I'm glad they started offering rehab. And I think that's a great thing. And I'm glad they have a wellness program. I think it's all very important. And less guys are dying, so it must be working.
That's true. One guy that was around when you were around and just decided to leave was The Undertaker. And I'm a big fan of that documentary that they put out. It makes me look at him like more of a legend than he already is, because it's like I'm always fascinated with the fact that these grown men will shut up and put their heads down and listen to another grown man. Like, there's a lot that says a lot about the respect that Undertaker commands without even saying it out loud. So when it comes to The Undertaker, a lot of people like myself, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and the narrative for the documentary is, who are you to tell the Undertaker to retire? Or like, do you have to tell him as a friend, as a coworker, like, hey, maybe you should go home? Or does it take you to tell yourself, like, damn, maybe I can't pull out those matches anymore? Do you feel like maybe he held on too long, or how does it feel as a wrestler to decide to retire? Do you think it takes somebody else to tell you, or do you think you have to tell yourself?
It's always been hard for wrestlers to leave this business. I don't think in any way, shape, or form that the Undertaker has stayed past his, um, stayed longer than he should. Which I'd be surprised if he's not going to be involved in the business from the office point of view or something. But he probably won't. He may, or at the very least, he'll probably step away completely, like Shawn Michaels did for a while, and then maybe he'll come back later in some aspect or in some capacity. But yeah, the Taker had that kind of respect. I think simply because of his loyalty to that business or to the company and his respect for the business. But he was loyal to Vince McMahon when a lot of people weren't. Uh, I think in large part that's why Shawn Michaels had so much pull for a long time too. He stayed with Vince and was loyal. So was Brett for a long time. But in the end, the one that has always been there more than anybody else and been loyal to Vince has been the Undertaker. And I think that's why he gets the respect and he deserves it. You know, as far as him, he's had some great matches even in these later years. I mean, that obviously that Goldberg match was a stinker, but I don't think Goldberg was prepared. But I don't think he's outstayed his welcome or anything like that either. Taker has always been prepared. If he was going to wrestle in a match, he's always been prepared. But yeah, we have to tell ourselves. Nobody else can tell us. I mean, look at your Ric Flairs and your Hulk Hogans. These guys, it's hard for people to leave this business, and for a lot of reasons too. People don't realize, man, how much of it's like a drug walking out every night in front of cheering fans. It's amazing. And when that's gone all of a sudden, that can be very dangerous. I mean, just look at the trouble I went through. All of a sudden, boom, it was over. And and I went home, and I wasn't in the WWF anymore. I wasn't a wrestler, and there were no fans anymore. And it spiraled pretty fast. So, yeah, it can be hard for people to walk away from this business. But I'm glad he's finally making that decision, and he deserves all the accolades and the respect he gets because he has earned it. He's been loyal, and he respects this business. He always has.
I've been a fan. Like, I don't have a first memory of watching wrestling. My brother told me I was like 2 years old, putting the sharpshooter on my brother's friend. I just been a lifelong fan, and you grow up with these characters, and unfortunately you lose some. I look fondly at Miss Elizabeth. Like, she looks like she was the sweetest lady in the wrestling business, and she was literally the first lady of the wrestling business in every aspect of that phrase. Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior. Later on you got Eddie Guerrero. But one that always sticks out is Owen Hart and British Bulldog. Do you have any stories of those guys being around them during that era that you were working?
It was always fun to be around Owen. Owen was always looking for a laugh, and it was never anything like bad, like mean or mean spirited. He pulled funny ribs, funny practical jokes. He was always funny. In the ring, you could always guarantee he was going to get a laugh out of everybody else in that ring at some point in time during the match. And he always did. He would always do something. And Davey Boy was a bit meaner in the rib department. He pulled some pretty rough ribs, but Davey was a funny guy too, and a great worker, and a great guy to be around. Very fun to hang out with. But yeah, those were two great guys. Of course, they came from Stu Hart's dungeon and the Hart family and all that. But yeah, they were great guys. And that thing with Owen was just, I remember watching, I was at home. I had already left. And I was at home watching it on some pirate box, watching the pay-per-view back when they had pirate cable boxes to watch free pay-per-views. I just remember seeing that thing go down, and I just remember going, I think Owen just died. I couldn't believe it. That was such a tragic event. Um, you know, it was just so unexpected. So, but yeah, he was very much loved, and so was Davey. Uh, but man, it was just such a sad thing that happened. But Owen always got a laugh. Owen always, always, always. He was one of the first people to rib me, and I fell for it 100%. So yeah, I love those guys.
Man, Duke, I really appreciate all your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I just have a few. I like to call this the lightning round of questions, like just to finish off the interview, and then we'll head out. What does this name mean to you, Bobby Wales?
The guy that trained me, the Jamaican Jammer, Bobby Wales. He, when I was still in high school, I found out where his school was. It was just a ring and a little dirty warehouse in the middle of Opelika, Miami, Florida. And yeah, he was a great teacher. I was in great shape from amateur wrestling, and I thought I was the shit. And he calmed me down real quick. He would say, calm down. And I learned really fast, but I wanted to learn faster. He would calm me down. He was a great teacher. He also, at that time, training with us was Norman Smiley. There were some good wrestlers that came through that little dirty warehouse and that little grungy ring. But he was a great man, and he's still around. He's running shows, I think, in Jamaica now. But yeah, Bobby's a great guy.
Who was the nicest guy in the locker room at that time when you were working?
Mick Foley was always a really nice guy. Yeah, I mean, Owen was a nice guy. There was a lot of nice guys. I mean, a lot of people were fake nice too, but there was some. Like Mick Foley was always very pleasant and nice to be around. Owen Hart always tried to give me good advice, not like his brother, shitty advice. Owen actually tried on several occasions, and I didn't realize it at that time. He tried to point me in the right direction, and I just didn't know what was going on. But yeah, those are two really nice guys. And I always tell people too, man, you can count the number of guys that were loyal to their wives and didn't do a bunch of drugs and alcohol on one hand, and two of the guys on that one hand would be Owen Hart and Mick Foley. Those guys were good people.
That's awesome. One thing I always wondered, any underrated talent that doesn't get appreciated as much as they should, looking back?
It seems like all the fans say everybody's underrated these days. Every person you see come up in a conversation that maybe wasn't a main event star, they say they were underrated. I was underrated, but I said this. I did Austin's podcast last year, and we were talking, and I made the statement. As far as I'm concerned, I wasn't a ring general. I didn't have great psychology, but for a big man, I really moved well in the ring. In that respect, maybe I was underrated, but underrated is kind of a subjective term. Again, it's a matter of if somebody, all of the right kind of things have to come together at once. The perfect storm. They have to get the right push. They have to have the right gimmick, and they have to believe in their character, and they have to understand how to get over. All those things have to happen. And a lot of people don't realize those things, and it doesn't happen. So, you could say a lot of people are underrated, but I don't know. It seems like everybody's underrated now.
I'm originally from New Jersey, Elizabeth, New Jersey, 10 minutes away from Newark Airport. Do you want to shout out your favorite restaurant / gentleman's bar over there?
I don't remember what it was called, but yeah, you could eat you a good meal and go and watch the girls dance around with the topless girls at the go-go bar right there connected to it. What was that place called? Tell me.
Lookers.
Man, we would fly into Newark, New Jersey, and it would be like me and like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and a couple of and we would we would have a show that night, like, in Nassau Coliseum or something, and we'd be sitting there eating lunch, drinking beers, watching women dance before we had to go to a show. Damn lookers. Holy crap. I have tried so hard to remember what that place was called. Lookers. And they had a damn deli attached to it.
Yeah, they did. They have a afternoon buffet. It's the weirdest thing. It's such a institution in my hometown. Everybody's like, oh man, everybody goes there. Wrestlers go there, actors go there. I know the business has changed in the past 20, 30 years, but if you can give any piece of advice for any aspiring professional wrestler out there, going through what you went through and getting out of what you got through, what would you tell somebody? Just a 19, 20-year-old kid who wants to be a pro wrestler.
You're going to take bumps and bruises. You're going to have injuries. Don't get wrapped up in drugs. That's not the solution. There was this unwritten rule when I was there back in those days. If you got hurt, you didn't tell anybody because you would lose your spot and you wouldn't make money. Things are different now. They take better care of people. If you get hurt, you go get it fixed and then come back. But don't drag yourself up and down the roads doing a bunch of painkillers trying to stay in the business, because that just ends badly for everybody. Definitely, you could end up becoming addicted, or you get even worse, end up being dead. But yeah, that's the main piece of advice. Don't be a partier, man. You grew up loving that business probably for a reason. Remember that, and always study the business, study how to get better, and come up with better creative ideas for yourself. Don't waste your time getting drunk and high and looking for the next party. A lot of wrestlers have wasted a lot of time doing that bullshit. The Clique used to sit around talking wrestling all the time. You have to respect that. They were very creative. They created great spots for themselves because they had ideas. That's what you should spend your time doing coming up to the business. Come up with great ideas, work hard, get better in the ring. Don't waste your time being a partier, because in the end, you'll be out of the business.
Duke, thank you so much for all your time. Where can they find you on social media so they can shout you out and stuff?
Well, a lot of my fan interaction has been on Facebook, actually. I always make the joke, I am so over on Facebook, which is a funny thing to say. But on Facebook, my private account is Mike Droese, my real name, obviously. That's where a lot of the stories will originate. I also have a fan page, Duke the Dumpster Official, on Facebook. I have an Instagram, Duke the Dumpster Official, Instagram page. And on Twitter, it is Real Duke Droese. Those are all things that I'm doing. We are getting ready to start a podcast July 10th, Friday, July 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, called Road to Recovery. Obviously, I have a lot to say in that respect, but it's not just about drug and alcohol recovery. It's about recovery from any kind of tough situations people have been through in life. And it's just going to be an interesting show. And it's going to be funny because I always have to act like a jackass no matter what I'm doing. So it will be fun. But yeah, Road to Recovery with my friend Avi Klein, brought to you by Wrestling with Anything But. We will be doing it live on my Facebook, my private page, Mike Droese, on Facebook Live. And it will also kind of be simulcasting, for lack of a better term, to Twitch. And then eventually we'll move over to Twitch completely. But yes, Friday, July 10th, Facebook Live on my Mike Droese Facebook page, Road to Recovery. It is the podcast with a purpose.
Nice. You can find all those links in the description below. This is D for DNC Digital. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure you follow me at DNC Digital on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. This is D. You guys take care of yourselves. For Duke the Dumpster Droese, WWF wrestler in the 90s, and myself, you guys have a great day. What's going on?